Hi, I'm Josh, and I am so grateful you've decided to spend some time with me as I talk about the board games I played in the month of June. Now, we've had some thunderstorms and rain showers rolling through here all afternoon, which is wonderful. I love rain and a good thunderstorm, but you might hear some background noise periodically. So hopefully it doesn't mess with my sound too much. But June was one of those months where I was very grateful to have board games and a board gaming friend to distract me from feeling constantly overwhelmed by life. And I took full advantage of that. I played 14 different games through the month of June, which might be a new record for me. So it was a great month from the standpoint of the board gaming. It also proves to be a great gaming month in the fact that 3 of these games I actually bumped up their ratings. They were games that I had previously played and decided on further plays that these games deserve to be even higher rated. But I wasn't the only one. Paul as well bumped up 3 of his ratings in this month. Just nothing to do with my own ratings, just what he decided to do personally. 2 of the games were the same with both of us, so both of us decided we needed to increase our ratings for those games, and with the other ones they were different games. As usual, I'll be going through these games in order of my lowest rated game to my highest rated game, and since I've got so much ground to cover here, I'm going to try not to spend more than about a minute or so on each of these games, although I will probably be spending the most amount of time on the first game I talked about because I think it's one that I haven't previously mentioned before, so I'll take a bit of time with that one, but the rest of them I'll kind of get through pretty quickly. Let's get right to it. One of my favorite genres of games are those all versus one style of kind of hide and seek game where you have one player who's doing hidden movement throughout a game board while all the other players are working together to try to find and either capture or do whatever they need to do to the person once they have found them. And so you have this team of players cooperating together to try to find the person who's doing the hidden movement. Now, I have loved this style of game ever since playing a game called Scotland Yard as a child. And so in my adult gaming years, I have tried a bunch of these type of games, and I've actually talked about them in a previous video, which I will try to remember to link at the end of this one. But the specific game that I'm talking about this month is called Whitehall Mystery. This is a game that is very much on the kind of Scotland Yard level of simplicity in that it is a very, very simple game to learn and plays relatively quickly in comparison to some of the more complex versions of this style of game like Fury of Dracula, for example, which is a huge, complex, long running game to play. But Whitehall Mystery is on the far end of the simplicity spectrum for sure. And the reason I picked it up was because of my experiences with Scotland Yard when I was a child. I saw Whitehall Mystery and I realized that it was about as easy as Scotland Yard to pick up and get into, but it seemed to have a slightly more interesting mechanism for locating the trail of the person who's doing the hidden movement. And so I picked it up to try with my family to see if I could get my kids into it just as much as I was into Scotland Yard when I was a kid. So several years ago, when I was still married, I took this game out with my wife and my 2 young kids, and we gave it a try, and it was just a failure. The way it worked out, I played the hidden mover, and my wife and 2 boys were playing the 3 police detectives who were trying to locate me, and they just had a terrible time of it. They could not locate my trail. I just went from one location to the next, and my wife at the time was getting increasingly frustrated, and my kids were getting antsy, and finally I got the final location and won the game, and we put it back on the shelf, and it has sat there on the shelf up until the month of June when I finally tried it with Paul. Now, I will mention that in terms of trying it as a family game, I decided that when playing with my kids, I would take the very gruesome theme and change it so that the person who was doing the hidden movement was a burglar who had to burgle houses in different neighborhoods on the board, rather than enacting the Jack the Ripper sequence of events. And the rulebook for Whitehall Mystery does have some pretty gruesome historical details in there, which you may want to skip if you're not into that type of thing. But I wanted to give the game a try at least one more time and play it with Paul. So again, I played the hidden movement player. Paul played the 3 police detective characters, and it went pretty well. Because I had had such an easy time of it as the criminal player in that game years ago, I decided to tweak 1 or 2 things to make it a bit easier for the police detectives, and unfortunately I didn't play as well as I could have as the criminal player, in that I really didn't take advantage of the special movement abilities I had when I needed to, because Paul ended up catching me when I was only about halfway through my goal of reaching 4 locations on the board. So basically right at the point where I grabbed that second location, Paul's police detectives caught me there, and I realized afterwards I guess it's better to use my special abilities to move more quickly or more sneakily than to not use them and end up getting caught. So the game was over relatively quickly and we didn't get the full experience of it. I did enjoy it. I rated it 6.5 out of 10. Paul gave it just a 5.5 out of 10. And this one is going to go on my for sale pile because since it wasn't a hit when I tried it with the kids, I don't think we're going to end up trying it again. And I have a couple other games in the genre that I enjoy much more, although I did subsequently decide that maybe I'll try Hunt for the Ring with Paul at some point to see if that ends up hitting a bit better. But then once I started to look through the rule book of that game again, I realized, oh yeah, this game is just really very complicated and somewhat unintuitive with the way the game all comes together. It's not, I don't know, it's one of those games where what you're doing in the game isn't super complicated. You're just, if you're the Nazgul, you're walking around looking for the ring bearers, and if you're the ring bearers, you're just trying to sneak through to the safe location on the other side of the board. But the way that they've designed this game, there's just a lot of weird fiddly rules that aren't super intuitive, and so I've decided to also put Hunt for the Ring on my pile of games to sell and just keep my very favorite of the bunch, which is Spectre Ops, just a game that I love and can't get enough of. There is another game that came out a couple years back called Mind that I would love to try because I keep hearing such rave reviews about it, and it's co-designed by Sen-Foong Lim, who is a local game designer, who is a great designer and, more importantly, just a really wonderful human being. So that is a game I would be interested in trying at some point, but for now, Spectre Ops is the one that I love the most of the genre. Alright, I ended up spending a long time on that game. I'm going to try not to spend more than about a minute or so on each of these games. So let's get through the rest of these 13 other games as quick as possible. We have next Jager und Sammler, or Hunter and Gatherer, which Evan just loves and keeps requesting, so I got it to the table with him and played 2 players with him again. It's the game where Reiner Knizia essentially took Hey That's My Fish and blew it up into a bigger, slightly more interesting and slightly more involved style of game. It's funny, the phrase that automatically comes to mind is Hey That's My Fish on steroids, but I never understand that phrase because being on steroids isn't a good thing. Being on steroids doesn't make anything better, so I don't really particularly like that phrase, but it's basically Hey That's My Fish in a larger format. And like I said, Evan still loves the game. I rate it 7 out of 10. It is a very good game, and I do have something for these prehistoric themes for some reason. I enjoy that a lot. Moving along to another game. This time is one that I've taught now to both my kids, and this is Raptor. So my younger son Wyatt, who is a big dinosaur fan, kept asking to play Raptor, and we finally had a chance to do so, so we got it out and I explained it to him. And of course he wanted to play as the dinosaur side, but the problem is this is a highly asymmetrical game where the scientist player is trying to capture the baby dinosaurs to take to study. The dinosaur player is trying to get the dinosaur babies to safety and get the mother dino to eat the scientists, and the way they play is very different. The problem is the game is balanced very much in favor of the scientist player. It is so much more difficult to win as the Raptors, so having my son play the dinos was kind of tricky. I tried a couple of different balancing techniques. At one point I decided maybe I would remove the scientist number 4 card out of their deck so that it would be harder to bring more scientists to the board, and so that the scientist player would have to play the refresh their hand of cards card more frequently. Problem is, that kind of unbalances some of the other interactions between the two card decks, because it's a game where players simultaneously play cards and reveal what they've played, and based on what has been played, that determines whether the player's card action is carried out or whether the number on the card that indicates the number of action points is what happens. So the next thing I tried was allowing the dinos to have one free baby movement, or one free movement per baby dino per turn, so that they could always at least make one move with the baby dinos. And with that variant, my son won relatively easily, although I had captured 2 of the 3 dinosaurs needed for victory. So I guess it maybe wasn't that far apart in the end. But what I might try is maybe just giving a single baby a free move per turn to see if that balances it. Regardless, my younger son Wyatt enjoyed the game a bunch. I think he's going to want to keep coming back to this one, and I rate it 7 out of 10. When I had played it with Paul in the past, he had rated it 6 out of 10. Speaking of Paul, the next one was a game of trains with the Rising Sun expansion that the two of us did as a 2-player game. The Rising Sun expansion just makes the game so much better because it adds a huge selection of cards that you can mix in or out with other cards in the base game. This game is more or less the game Dominion played on a board with a train theme. So you're doing all the deck building mechanisms like you do in Dominion, except for you're laying tracks on the board and that sort of thing. And with this particular game, I decided that I would make our card selection pool all about money. So getting lots of money, having cards that allow you to spend money to do effects, and it worked out very well. We had a fun game again. This is a game that anyone who is familiar with Dominion would pick up really easily. It's not a complicated game. It plays super fast, especially with 2 players. Thankfully, I have a couple of good 2-player maps that make for a really tight competitive space even with 2 players. The nice thing about having a larger selection of maps is you can base the size of your map based on the amount of players that are playing, so that the game can remain competitive regardless of the number of players that are in the game. I continue to rate this game 7 out of 10. Paul rates it 7.5 out of 10. And in this particular game we played, Paul squeaked out a narrow victory of 35 victory points to 32. So it was a nice close game. Next, Paul and I got back to Pandemic Fall of Rome, the really brilliant Rome-themed Pandemic. It is obviously a cooperative game based on the Pandemic system. We played 2 games actually back-to-back on the normal difficulty level. I think the last time we played was on an easier difficulty level, but this time we actually lost both times playing on normal difficulty. So the game is a challenging game for 2 very experienced gamers who've played a ton of Pandemic. It does challenge us even on the normal difficulty levels, so it's a great version of the Pandemic system. I rate it 7.5 out of 10. Paul rates it 8 out of 10. Next, I was very excited to get back to a tiny little 2-player game called Shadows in Kyoto. Speaking of games I loved when I was a kid, I really enjoyed Stratego, where you had 2 players with hidden armies. You had your whole army that was just facing you. All your opponent can see is the back of your pieces. Same with their army. And then only when 2 players ended up in conflict with each other on the same space, then they were revealed to see who would win the conflict. So Shadows in Kyoto takes that kind of similar system, strips it right down so that you only have, I think, 5 or 6 characters each. And in this version of the game, you are playing as secret agents, and 2 of your secret agents have real intelligence, and your other 4 secret agents have fake intel. And there's a few different ways you can win. You can either get one of your agents with real intel all the way across the board to your opponent's side of the board, or you could get your opponent to capture 3 of your fake intel carriers to make them lose the game. So yes, you can't. Each of the agents has different strength levels, and when they come into conflict, one might be captured, but you don't necessarily want to capture too many of your opponent's agents, especially the ones that are carrying the fake intel. If you capture both of the ones that have the real intel, that's another way you can win the game. So it's a great little game. It's all card driven too, so it's based on playing cards to move on the board, and it is one that I enjoyed really well. The game we had was very tense and interesting. Paul ended up winning the game by getting one of his real intel agents to my side of the board, and I was very happy to get back to it. This is the first game that I'm going to mention that I increased the rating on. It was 7 out of 10 previously, and I bumped that up to 7.5 out of 10, which matches Paul's rating of 7.5 out of 10. So I really do want to explore this game more and keep playing it. The next game I'm going to talk about is, once again, Magic the Gathering. But for the very first time ever, I played in a cube draft. And with this cube draft, my friend who lives in London, Ontario, basically built a cube. Basically, he hand-selected, personally, 360 cards to put in this box that's called a cube. And he had to choose 360 cards that, when looked at their individual colors of each of the 5 color types, that they were relatively power balanced, so that if some player drafted white cards, they weren't overpowered compared to another color, as an example. And with 360 cards, that gives him enough cards to do a draft with 8 players, although he ended up having myself and 4 other friends over. So there were 6 of us total, and basically he had divided up, he had shuffled up those 360 cards, divided them up into boxes of 15 cards, like a standard draft pack, and we each started by just choosing a 15 card pack, opening it up, drafting a card, passing the remainder to our left, continuing to do that until we had 15 cards. Then we grabbed another box of 15, selected one, passed the other way counterclockwise until we had 15 more, and then did that a third time, going back to clockwise drafting. So at the end of that, we had a hand of 45 cards, and from those 45 cards, we had to choose around 23 of those cards to build a deck with, and then we could choose any 17 lands we wanted to put into the deck to create a 40 card deck. And then once we had done that big draft, we had a mini tournament where we ended up playing a best of 3 match against 3 different opponents each to see who ultimately won the tournament. Now, I ended up making a really dumb and really big error when I was building my deck, because for some weird reason I thought I was supposed to have 17 cards and 23 lands instead of the opposite. So I ended up with way more lands in my deck than I was supposed to, and somehow, though, it worked out where in my first best of 3 match, I ended up winning game 1, losing game 2, and winning game 3. So I won my first best of 3. But from there, I found myself just constantly mana flooded. Like, I just kept wondering why I just had hands full of land cards and not much in the way of action cards. So I lost my second best of 3, 2-0, and then it was, I think, at the point where I was doing my third best of 3 that my opponent, my friend in London actually, who I was playing against, realized, wait, you've got way too many lands in your deck. And I was like, oh, I'm so dumb. I got the numbers reversed. So I was able to kind of fix that problem, but I still ended up losing that best of 3, 2-0. And at the end of the afternoon, I ended up placing 5th out of the 6 players. But it was so much fun, even though I was dealing with a bit of anxiety over the fact that I was basically having to hang out with a bunch of strangers. I had my one friend there, but the other 4 guys who were there I hadn't previously met. And the other thing was, all 5 of the other guys had vastly more Magic knowledge than I did. Every card that was hitting the table, they instantly knew what the card does, what the effects were, and I'm like, I haven't seen any of this before. I don't really follow Magic that closely. So I was way outclassed in terms of my own Magic experience, and it was really the first time I've ever tried this kind of drafting format. I had done a little bit of basic drafting, playing 2-player one-on-one with a friend, but it was so much fun. I enjoyed it so much. It's been so long since I've sat down and built a deck of Magic cards, and it made me realize just how much I enjoy just collecting some cards and building a deck out of it and then playing it and see how it works out. It's totally my jam. I really enjoyed that thing. I hope I get to do it again. I can't imagine the number of hours my friend put into selecting 360 hand-picked cards to make this cube with. But it was a wonderful time, and I would love to do it again at some point. Oh dear, I'm spending way too much time talking about each of these games. I'll try to keep it moving along. Before I do, I just want to send out just my usual big thank you to my Patreon supporters. 2 more of my Patreon supporters have increased their pledge levels again. Saver Girl, once again, increased her pledge level. And my highest tier supporter, Osmondus, increased his pledge level even further, which, stop doing that. That's too much. It's really too much. But I tell you what, I just really appreciate it so much. I'm getting slightly emotional because of just the amount of struggle the past couple of months have been money-wise. But this support just means so much to me, and I'm so grateful to all of you. Okay, next I got on my computer and played on Steam Isle of Skye from Chieftain to King. This is just the base game version of Isle of Skye, not the full big box version that I have on the shelf here now, but I really enjoy the game. I rate it an 8.5 as a base game. I rate it, I think, a 9 out of 10 with the big box, the whole experience. But it was fun to knock off a quick game on Steam there and test the AI. I finally actually beat the normal level AI, so it was a pretty decent AI they got on there on Steam. Up next, I actually played a cooperative game with my older son, Evan. We played Codenames Duet, which is the two-player version of the wonderful word-guessing game Codenames. I enjoy this version so much. There's something about it that really hits me in the sweet spot. With the duet version, I love that you are simultaneously a clue giver and a clue guesser. I rated 8.5 out of 10. Paul in the past had rated it 8.5 out of 10, and Evan enjoyed it too. We ended up knocking off 2 games actually in a row, so he actually enjoyed it enough to play a second game right off the bat. Okay, my next 2 games are games that I had increased the rating for. The first one here is K2, and specifically we played the Broad Peak expansion of K2. This is just such a simple yet so thematic game of mountaineering, just trying to get your 2 mountain climbers to traverse the mountain peaks of Broad Peak in this case, and hopefully not run out of oxygen and die. So it's just a brilliant game. It is so full of tension every step of the way. You're just racking your brain trying to eke out every tiny little bit of advantage you can with the cards you have to play, and I love it. It was an 8.5 for me. Now I have increased it to a 9 out of 10, and when I've played it with Paul in the past, he had rated it 7.5 out of 10, and he bumped that all the way up to a 9 as well. And part of that, for me anyways, is the fact that Broad Peak takes the basic game, which is already amazing, and makes it so much interesting by making this traversal route where you get a bunch of bonus points if you can get a climber to cross all the way across the mountain. Plus there are 3 different peaks on the mountain where the first player to reach each peak gets the most points, but you can still continue to get points as you reach each of those peaks. So it just takes the game that's already amazing and just bumps it up even more. So Broad Peak was a huge hit with us. And then going back to my prehistoric themes, we got King Domino Origins to the table yet again, and after yet another play I realized this is just an almost perfect little game. I had rated it 8.5 as well. I once again took that and bumped it up to a 9, and Paul in the past had rated it 8 out of 10, and he bumped his rating up to 9 as well. Both of us just can't get enough of this little game. It is so easy, so quick to play, but again presents so many interesting decisions as you're playing through it. We were talking about, Paul and I, how neither of us particularly enjoyed the original version of King Domino, but this Origins version of the game that has actually 2 very interesting scoring systems that you can use one or the other for different play experiences, but we've really focused on the cave people scoring version, where you can get different cave people who offer points in different ways. The other scoring version I think would be better with 3 to 4 players, and that gives you kind of a majority for having the most of each type of resources. It gives you points for having majorities of resources. However, in the version we play most often, we use those resources to purchase the scoring tiles which go on our board, but the resources we don't use to purchase the scoring tiles are typically the ones that interact with our point scoring people to give us the points. So you have to balance the, do I want to spend some of my resources to get more tiles that allow me to score points with the resources I have on the board, or how do I want to make that balance work? So much fun, such a brilliant little game. Last month I spent quite a bit of time talking about Battles of Westeros, and after those initial 2 games we got back to scenario 3 in the campaign. As we play through the scenarios, I've been following along. There's a thread on Board Game Geek where a gamer had played through most of the base game scenarios twice and had recorded which side won the scenarios, and the first few games definitely seemed to be imbalanced towards one side or the other. Scenario 1 was imbalanced towards Stark, I believe, and then Scenario 2 was towards Lannister. This most recent scenario was back to Stark again, and Paul did win as the Stark player. But for me, it didn't take away any of the enjoyment. I do like the challenge. It's kind of fun for me to go into it knowing that I might be the underdog there and see what I can make of it. Now, with me being down after this game 2-1, obviously I owe Paul another victory, and a Lannister always pays his debts. So anyways, Battles of Westeros is a game I rate 9 out of 10. This is another game that Paul had bumped up his rating slightly. After our first couple of plays, he had rated it 7.5 out of 10, but after our third play, he bumped that up to an 8 out of 10, which excites me because I hope it means he's going to continue to want to play through the campaign with me. And like I had hinted at previously, some of the scenarios get really interesting in terms of the objectives and the way they're laid out. So definitely excited to keep at Battles of Westeros. Finally, second best of the month was Planet Unknown. Once again, Paul and I got back to this one because neither of us can get enough of this amazing game. This time, Paul squeaked out the narrowest victory, 65 points to 64. So it was so close, which for a game that is so asymmetrical in terms of each of us has a unique corporation that has special abilities, and we're each playing on different planets that have different limitations, and yet the game was 1 point apart. So it just shows you how balanced the game can be, even though it's as asymmetrically created as it is. And then finally, number 1 of the month is a game that the more we play, the more Paul requests to play it again, and I'm only too happy to oblige because it is Spirit Island, the cooperative game of preventing colonizing forces from getting a foothold on your islands and taking over. In the past, we've only ever played the base game with the Branch and Claw expansion, just kind of as the base game is laid out, but this time we tried our first scenario, which actually does come in the base game. So it presented us with a slightly different small tweak to how the game is played. In this case, in the case of the scenario we chose, there were kind of exploration points on the different regions of the island, and if we got to it first, we could explore it and hope to find something that benefited us, or if the invaders got to it first, they might find something that benefited them. So it was super fun. It was really neat to try a scenario for the first time. But again, with the experience levels that Paul and I have now, we ended up pulling off another fairly easy victory. So we need to probably start to explore the more challenging spirits, I think, and see if we can handle the ones that are labeled as hard difficulty to play. But there's no doubt we'll get back to it again soon. And Paul actually purchased it on Steam, so now both of us have it on Steam, so I could definitely see us playing it on the computer now with each other as well. And that was my big gaming month. Please tell me what games you have been playing recently. Are there any that you have been enjoying a lot? Have you acquired anything new? Is there anything coming up that you have your eye on? You know I love to hear all about it, so please do get into the comments, let me know. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead and give me a thumb up. If you didn't enjoy it, give me a thumb down and let me know what you didn't like about it. A simple click for a thumb and a subscribe goes a long way towards helping me out. So I appreciate you watching, and I look forward to chatting with you soon again. Cheers. Now, we've had some... I was vague that there were games working to find... But yeah, Whitehall Mystery is on the and the rule book for it. They're just trying to sneak through and with the cube draft, what happens is, or at least what happens in this, or at least the way it played out with what it really hits me, and I once again rated it